My mother-in-law called me a parasite while I was bedridden after surgery, saying I was draining her son's finances and ruining his future. She had no idea that for the past 3 years, I'd been the one secretly funding her entire lifestyle, including the luxury senior living community she bragged about to her friends. What would you do if the person who degraded you during your lowest moment was surviving on your generosity? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Eloisa Robinson, and I need to tell you about the day my entire world collapsed. Not from tragedy, but from a single venomous sentence spoken by someone I'd bent over backwards to help. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything fell apart. I remember because Tuesdays were always my favorite, the day David and I would have breakfast together before his early hospital rounds. He's a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial, and those quiet morning moments were sacred to us. But that particular Tuesday, I woke up to find him already gone, and a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Emergency surgery. Love you. Don't overdo it." I should have listened to that last part. I was 5 weeks into recovering from a double spinal fusion surgery. For those of you who don't know what that entails, imagine someone literally reconstructing your backbone with titanium rods and screws. The pain was indescribable, and the recovery process was supposed to take 6 months minimum. My orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Fletcher, had been crystal clear. Complete bed rest for the first 8 weeks. No lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup, and absolutely no twisting motions. The surgery had been necessary after a car accident the previous December. A delivery truck had run a red light on Michigan Avenue, T-boning my sedan on the driver's side. I'd spent 3 days in ICU with a fractured spine, broken ribs, and a concussion. The insurance settlement was still pending, but the medical bills were piling up faster than I could process them. David had been incredible through it all. Every morning before work, he'd help me shower, change my surgical dressings, and set up my medications within easy reach. Every evening, he'd come home exhausted from 12-hour shifts and still cook dinner, help me with my physical therapy exercises, and sleep in the guest room so his tossing and turning wouldn't accidentally hurt me. We'd been married for 7 years at that point, and I'd never loved him more than during those weeks when I was completely helpless. He never once complained, never made me feel like a burden, never suggested that my injury was an inconvenience to his life. His mother, Patricia, on the other hand, was a different story entirely. Patricia Reynolds, she'd kept her maiden name after David's father passed away, was a force of nature. At 68, she was the kind of woman who wore designer pantsuits to the grocery store and wouldn't be caught dead without her signature red lipstick perfectly applied. She lived in an upscale senior living community in Naperville called the Meridian Estates, the kind of place with a wine bar in the lobby, a full-service spa, and weekly trips to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. David called her once a week like clockwork, every Sunday evening at 7. I'd always found it sweet how devoted he was to his mother, especially since he was an only child and she'd raised him alone after his father died when David was just 12. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through medical school, and he'd always said he owed her everything. What David didn't know, what nobody knew, except me and my accountant, was that Patricia hadn't worked a day in the past 3 years. Let me back up and explain how that happened, because it's central to everything that came after. 3 years ago, I sold my tech startup. I'd founded Robinson Analytics straight out of business school, building it from a one-woman operation in our apartment to a thriving company with 42 employees and contracts with Fortune 500 companies. We specialized in predictive analytics for healthcare systems. Ironic, considering I'd met David at a pitch meeting when his hospital was considering our services. When a larger firm offered to acquire us for $18 million, I took the deal. After taxes, legal fees, and paying out my co-founders and employees, I walked away with just under $7 million. David knew about the sale, of course, but what he didn't know was the exact amount. I'd told him it was around $2 million, which was still life-changing money, but not enough to make him think we could retire early or stop working. David loved his work, and I knew that if he thought we had serious wealth, it might change something fundamental about who we were as a couple. I also didn't tell him that I'd immediately set up a complex network of trusts, investment accounts, and financial structures designed to generate income while preserving capital. My financial advisor, Marcus Chen, had helped me create a portfolio that was generating roughly $400,000 annually in relatively passive income. Shortly after the sale went through, Patricia had called David in tears. The Meridian Estates was increasing their monthly fees by $2,800, bringing her total cost to $6,500 per month. Her pension and Social Security couldn't cover it, and she'd been told she'd have to move to a more affordable facility, which, in Patricia's mind, meant somewhere beneath her standards. David had been beside himself with worry. His mother had been so proud of her independence, and the thought of her having to downsize or move somewhere less prestigious was killing him. He'd started looking at his finances, trying to figure out how he could help without completely decimating his own savings. That's when I'd made the decision that would eventually lead to me lying in bed 5 weeks post-surgery, listening to Patricia call me a parasite. I'd told David I wanted to help. I'd suggested that we could cover the difference in Patricia's monthly fees, just the $2,800 increase, not the full amount. It would be tight, I'd said, but we could manage it from my remaining startup funds if we were careful. David had been reluctant at first. He didn't want to take my money, especially since I'd worked so hard to build my company. But I'd insisted, telling him that family was family and that his mother had sacrificed so much for him. What was money compared to making sure she was comfortable and happy? He'd finally agreed, and I'd set up an automatic monthly transfer of $2,800 to Patricia's account. What David didn't know was that 3 months later, Patricia had called me directly. Not him, me. She'd been crying, saying that even with our help, she was struggling. The Meridian Estates kept adding little fees here and there, a facilities maintenance charge, an activity enhancement fee, a premium dining surcharge. She was embarrassed to ask David for more help, she'd said, because she knew he was already stretching himself thin for her. Could I possibly help her out, just this once? Maybe another $1,000 a month, just temporarily until she figured something else out. I'd said yes, and I'd increased the monthly transfer to $3,800 without telling David. Then 6 months after that, Patricia had called again. The Meridian Estates was renovating, and residents were being asked to contribute to the Capital Improvements Fund. Patricia's share was $15,000 due immediately, or she'd face eviction. She was absolutely panicked, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. I'd transferred the $15,000 that same day. Over the next 2.5 years, it continued like that. A dental emergency that cost $8,000. A leak in her suite that required new flooring, $12,000 because she insisted on the premium hardwood. A European river cruise with her book club that she simply couldn't miss, $7,500. New furniture because hers was embarrassingly outdated, $18,000. Each time, she'd call me in tears, embarrassed and apologetic, promising it was the last time, swearing she'd figure out a better solution, and each time I'd transferred the money, increased the monthly payment, and kept my mouth shut. By the time of my accident, I was sending Patricia $7,200 every single month, plus covering various emergencies that popped up every few months. Over 3 years, I'd given her approximately $10,000, and David had no idea. Why didn't I tell him? That's the question I've asked myself 1,000 times since. The truth is complicated. Part of it was that I genuinely wanted to help. Patricia had raised an incredible man, and I respected what she'd sacrificed for him. Part of it was that I didn't want David to feel guilty or obligated. His relationship with his mother was important to him, and I didn't want money to complicate it. But if I'm being completely honest, there was another reason too. I liked being the person who could solve problems. I liked being generous, and maybe, somewhere deep down, I liked having this secret knowledge that I was taking care of David's mother in a way he couldn't. Patricia knew I hadn't told David about the full extent of my financial help. In fact, she'd specifically asked me not to mention it, saying it would upset him, or make him feel like he wasn't doing enough for her. I'd agreed, thinking I was protecting their relationship. I had no idea that Patricia had interpreted my silence as weakness, that she'd seen my generosity as something she could exploit, that she'd grown to resent me even as she cashed my checks every month. I wouldn't understand any of that until the morning she stood in my bedroom doorway, looked at me lying helpless in bed, and showed me exactly what she really thought of me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the days leading up to that moment, because they matter. David had been scheduled for a medical conference in Boston the week after my surgery. It was a major cardiology symposium where he was presenting research on a new valve replacement technique. He'd been preparing for months, and the presentation could significantly advance his career. But after my surgery, he'd immediately tried to cancel, saying there was no way he could leave me alone. I'd insisted he go. The conference was only 4 days, and I'd arranged for a home healthcare aide to come twice daily to help me with bathing, dressing changes, and medication management. My best friend Jennifer had promised to check in every day. We'd meal prep together before my surgery, so the fridge was stocked with easy-to-reheat containers. David had been reluctant, but I'd convinced him. And honestly, I'd thought I'd be fine. The aide was competent, Jennifer was reliable, and I had my phone within reach at all times. What could go wrong in 4 days? What I hadn't anticipated was Patricia deciding this was the perfect opportunity to visit. She'd called David the night before he left for Boston, telling him she was worried about me being alone and wanted to come stay at the house while he was gone. David had been touched by her concern and had immediately agreed, probably relieved that I'd have additional company. He'd asked me if I minded, and what was I supposed to say? No, your mother, who I've been secretly funding for 3 years, can't visit. Of course I'd said it was fine. Patricia had arrived the morning David left, rolling a designer suitcase into our guest room like she was checking into a luxury hotel. She'd air-kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired, which is code for terrible in Patricia speak. The first day had been fine. Patricia had mostly stayed out of my way, spending her time rearranging my kitchen cabinets and making disapproving noises about our furniture choices. The healthcare aide, a kind woman named Rosa, had come at her scheduled times, and everything had gone smoothly. The second day, Patricia had started making comments. Little things at first. Observations about how much the medications must cost. Questions about whether my insurance was covering everything. Wondering aloud how long I'd be out of commission and unable to work. I'd brushed it off, attributing it to her general tendency toward tactlessness. The third day, Rosa had called in sick. Her daughter had the flu, and she couldn't risk exposing me to illness while I was recovering from surgery. She'd tried to arrange a substitute, but it was short notice, and nobody was available until the following day. It meant I'd need help with basic tasks, things I couldn't do myself yet, like showering, changing the surgical dressing on my back, and reaching items from high shelves. Jennifer had offered to come over, but she was dealing with her own crisis. Her elderly father had been hospitalized, and she was spending all her time at his bedside, which left Patricia. I'd asked her that morning if she could help me shower. It was humiliating to ask, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't reach my own back to wash it, and the surgeon had been adamant that the incision site needed to be kept clean to prevent infection. Patricia had sighed, actually sighed, and said, "I suppose I don't have a choice, do I?" That should have been my first warning sign, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The bathroom incident started innocuously enough. Patricia had helped me shuffle from the bedroom to the bathroom, her grip on my arm just a little tighter than necessary. I was moving slowly, taking careful steps to avoid any twisting motion that might aggravate my healing spine. Getting into the shower was an ordeal. We'd installed a plastic shower chair after I came home from the hospital, and I had to lower myself onto it with excruciating slowness while Patricia stood there watching with her arms crossed. "This is really quite inconvenient," she said, as I finally settled onto the chair. I had plans to meet Margaret for lunch at that new French bistro downtown. I apologized, feeling a flush of shame creep up my neck. Here I was, barely able to stand on my own, and I was disrupting her social calendar. The shower itself was awkward and painful. Patricia handed me the soap with visible reluctance, making little huffing noises every time I asked her to help me reach my back. When it came time to change the surgical dressing, she actually recoiled. "That's quite gruesome," she said, staring at the 18-inch incision running down my spine. I don't know how David looks at that every day. Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. She was just squeamish about medical things, I told myself. Not everyone had the constitution for wound care. Getting me dressed afterward was even worse. Patricia had grabbed the first clothes she found in my drawer, a pair of sweatpants and an old college t-shirt that David usually wore for yard work. When I gently suggested maybe the clean pajamas I'd laid out on the bed, she'd snapped, "Does it really matter what you're wearing? It's not like you're going anywhere." By the time she'd helped me back to bed, I was exhausted and close to tears from the pain. The whole process had taken nearly 2 hours, and I could feel every muscle in my body screaming in protest. "There," Patricia said, practically dropping me onto the mattress. "I need to go lie down." That was absolutely exhausting. She left without asking if I needed anything. Water, medication, the television remote that had fallen on the floor. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that she was just stressed about helping with such intimate tasks. That I was being oversensitive. That her curtness didn't mean anything. I should have trusted my instincts. That afternoon, I heard Patricia on the phone in the living room. My bedroom door was open, and her voice carried clearly down the hallway. She was talking to someone. I later learned it was her friend Diane from the Meridian Estates. "Oh, it's been absolutely dreadful," Patricia was saying. "I'm basically playing nurse to David's wife while he's gallivanting around Boston. She can't do anything for herself. Completely helpless." I froze, listening. "I don't know how long she expects this to go on," Patricia continued. "The surgery was weeks ago. At some point you'd think she'd make more of an effort. My neighbor's daughter had back surgery last year and was up and about in 2 weeks. My face burned. Different surgeries had different recovery timelines. My procedure had been extensive, involving multiple vertebrae. Dr. Fletcher had been clear that this was a major operation with a lengthy recovery period. "And the cost of everything," Patricia went on. "Those medications she's taking cost a fortune. David showed me the hospital bills before he left, over $200,000 so far. Can you imagine? I worry about what this is doing to his finances. He works so hard and she's just lying there draining his resources." I felt like I'd been slapped. Draining his resources? I was the one who'd been paying her bills for 3 years. I was the one who'd built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. I had more money in my investment accounts than David would make in 20 years of cardiology practice. But she didn't know that. To Patricia, I was just David's wife, someone who'd gotten lucky enough to marry her successful son. "I just hope she gets back on her feet soon," Patricia said with a dramatic sigh. "For David's sake. He deserves better than being tied down to an invalid." An invalid. That's what she thought of me. Not a person recovering from a traumatic injury and major surgery. Not her son's wife who loved him and had always treated his mother with respect. An invalid, a burden, a drain on resources. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a fog of hurt and anger. When Patricia brought me a sandwich for dinner, slapped together carelessly with the edges of the bread already curling, I thanked her quietly and forced myself to eat, even though every bite tasted like ashes. That night, I barely slept. My back was throbbing from the extended time in the shower, and my mind was spinning with Patricia's words. I kept replaying them over and over, finding new layers of cruelty in each repetition. The time the sun came up on the 4th day, the day David was supposed to return from Boston, I was emotionally raw and physically depleted. Patricia came into my room around 9 in the morning. No good morning, no asking how I'd slept. She just stood in the doorway, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to run to the pharmacy," she announced. "I'm out of my blood pressure medication. I'll be gone for about an hour." Before I could respond, she was gone. I heard the front door slam, then the sound of her car starting in the driveway. An hour came and went. Then 2 hours. Then 3. I needed to use the bathroom desperately, but I couldn't get out of bed safely on my own. The pain medication I was supposed to take at noon was on the kitchen counter, too far for me to reach. My water bottle was empty, and I was getting increasingly thirsty. I tried calling Patricia's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried texting her. No response. By 2 o'clock, I was in serious distress. The need to use the bathroom was becoming urgent, and the pain in my back was ramping up without my medication. I was starting to feel panicky, trapped in my own bed with no way to help myself. Almost called 911. I had my finger hovering over the button when I heard the front door open. Patricia walked in carrying shopping bags from Nordstrom and Sephora. Not pharmacy bags, shopping bags. She appeared in my doorway, saw my face, and had the audacity to look annoyed. "What's wrong now?" "I need help," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "I need to use the bathroom and I need my medication." "You've been gone for 5 hours." "5 hours?" She checked her watch with exaggerated surprise. "Oh my. Well, I ran into Caroline at the pharmacy and we decided to have lunch. Then I remembered I needed a few things from the mall. Time just got away from me." She didn't apologize. Didn't seem to register the distress I was in. Just set her shopping bags down and helped me to the bathroom with the same reluctant efficiency she'd shown the day before. Afterward, as she was helping me back to bed, I made the mistake of asking if she could bring me my medication and some fresh water. That's when she finally said it. The words that would change everything between us. Patricia stopped in the middle of the hallway, turned to look at me with cold eyes, and said, "You know, Eloisa, I've been very patient with you, but I think you're milking this injury for all it's worth. You're acting like a burden, and frankly, it's getting old. My son works himself to exhaustion while you lie around demanding to be waited on hand and foot. The least you could do is show some gratitude instead of constantly needing something." I stood there, leaning heavily on her arm because I couldn't support myself, and felt something inside me crack wide open. "I don't know how much longer David is going to put up with this," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's a good man, but everyone has their limits. If I were you, I'd make more of an effort to get better instead of playing the victim. Because at this rate, you're going to drive him away with all your neediness." She deposited me on the bed like a sack of groceries and walked out without another word. I lay there in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face, unable to process what had just happened. This woman I'd been supporting financially for 3 years, this woman whose lifestyle I'd been funding while keeping it secret from my own husband to protect her pride, had just called me a burden. A parasite, someone who was going to drive her son away. And the worst part? She believed it. She genuinely believed that I was some helpless, manipulative invalid who was taking advantage of David's good nature. She had no idea who she was really talking to. That's when I made my decision. I was done protecting Patricia from the truth. I was done enabling her delusion that she was somehow superior to me. I was done being generous to someone who saw my kindness as weakness. David was due home in 3 hours. And when he arrived, Patricia and I were going to have a very interesting conversation, one that was 3 years overdue. But first, I needed to make a phone call. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called Marcus Chen, my financial advisor. I had some documents I needed him to send over, immediately. If Patricia wanted to know who was really the burden in this family, I was more than happy to show her. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Eloisa, is everything okay?" I could hear the concern in his voice. I rarely called him outside of our quarterly portfolio reviews, and never in the middle of a weekday. "Marcus, I need you to pull together every transaction I've made to Patricia Reynolds over the past 3 years. Every wire transfer, every check, every automatic payment. I need dates, amounts, and a total sum. Can you have that ready within the hour?" There was a pause. Marcus had been my financial advisor since before I sold Robinson Analytics. He knew me well enough to understand that when I used that tone, I wasn't making a casual request. Of course, I'll also include the supporting documentation, the initial trust setup, the automatic transfer authorizations, everything. Do you want me to email it or? Email is fine. Send it to my personal account, not the joint one with David. And Marcus, include a summary sheet, something clear and straightforward that anyone could understand at a glance. Consider it done. Eloisa, is there anything else I can help with? You sound upset. I laughed, and it came out slightly unhinged. Let's just say I'm about to have a very enlightening family conversation. Thank you, Marcus. After I hung up, I made my second call to my lawyer, Simone Bradford. Simone had handled the sale of my company and managed all my legal affairs since. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and most importantly, she knew exactly how much money I actually had. Simone, I need advice. Hypothetically speaking, if someone has been receiving significant financial support from me for years without my husband's knowledge, and that person has now insulted and mistreated me, what are my legal obligations regarding future payments? Simone was quiet for a moment. Hypothetically, if these payments were gifts with no formal agreement or expectation of repayment, you have no legal obligation to continue them. You can stop at any time for any reason. However, I'd recommend documenting the decision in writing, just to protect yourself. Who are we talking about here? My mother-in-law. That single syllable contained volumes of understanding. How much are we talking about? Over $300,000 across 3 years. I heard Simone's sharp intake of breath. And your husband doesn't know? Not the full extent, no. He thinks we're contributing $2,800 monthly. The actual amount is significantly higher. Eloisa, you need to tell him. Today. Before you do anything else. If you unilaterally cut off payments without his knowledge, it could create serious trust issues in your marriage. Plus, he deserves to know where his mother's money has been coming from, especially if she's treating you badly. That's exactly what I'm planning to do. He's flying home in a few hours. Good. Document everything. The insults, the mistreatment, all of it. Not because you'll need it legally, but because emotions run high in these situations, and you want to be able to present facts clearly. And Eloisa? Be prepared for this to get messy. Family and money is always a volatile combination. After hanging up with Simone, I spent the next hour doing exactly what she'd suggested, documenting everything. I opened a note on my phone and started typing out every conversation I'd had with Patricia over the past 4 days. Every cutting remark, every instance of neglect, every moment of cruelty. My fingers flew across the screen. Day 1, Patricia comments that medications must cost a fortune. Day 2, overheard phone conversation where she calls me helpless and says I'm draining David's resources. Day 3, abandoned for 5 hours while she went shopping, called me a burden who is playing the victim, and suggested I would drive David away. Seeing it all written out like that, in stark black and white, made something crystallize in my mind. This wasn't just about the insults. This was about a fundamental lack of respect. Patricia saw me as less than someone who had married above her station and should be grateful for the privilege of being part of her son's life. She had no idea that I'd been the one propping up her lifestyle. That every time she'd brag to her friends about her luxury senior living community, her European vacations, her designer furniture, she'd been bragging about my money. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. Marcus had come through. I opened the attachment, and my breath caught. Marcus had created a beautifully organized spreadsheet with 3 years of transactions laid out in meticulous detail. Monthly transfers in one column, one-time payments in another, a running total in a third. The summary sheet was damning in its simplicity. Financial support provided to Patricia Reynolds in period. April 2022, March. 2025 monthly support payments. $190,400. Emergency special requests, $87,600. Capital improvements. Contribution, $15,000. Medical dental expenses, $8,000. Furniture, home improvements, $18,000 travel expenses. $7,500 total. $330,503. $130,500. More than most people earned in 5 years. More than many families had in their entire retirement savings. And Patricia had taken every penny while calling me a burden. I heard the front door open. Patricia was back from wherever she'd disappeared to after our confrontation. I heard her moving around in the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing. She didn't come to check on me. I pulled up my laptop and started composing an email to David. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. This was it. Once I sent this, there was no taking it back. I'd be exposing 3 years of secrets, changing the dynamic of his relationship with his mother, potentially causing a family rift that might never fully heal. But then I remembered Patricia's words. You're acting like a burden. My son works himself to exhaustion while you lie around demanding to be waited on. I started typing. David, there's something I need to tell you before you get home, so you have time to process it before you walk through the door. For the past 3 years, I've been providing significant financial support to your mother beyond what you know about. I'm attaching documentation from Marcus that details every payment. The total is $330,500. I didn't tell you because your mom asked me to keep it private, and I wanted to help without making you feel obligated or guilty. I was happy to do it. Your mother raised an incredible man, and supporting her felt like the right thing to do. However, while you've been in Boston, your mother has made it very clear what she thinks of me. She's called me a burden, suggested I'm taking advantage of you, and implied that I'm going to drive you away with my neediness while I recover from major surgery. I need you to know this not because I want you to be angry at her, but because I can't continue to support someone who has so little respect for me. I'm done being generous to someone who sees my kindness as weakness. We need to talk when you get home. I love you. E. I attached Marcus's documentation and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I waited. David texted back within 10 minutes. Just boarded my flight. Holy shit, Eloisa. We definitely need to talk. Are you okay? I typed back, I will be. Safe flight. Love you. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Patricia move around the house like she owned it. At one point, she passed by my open door without even glancing in. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was staying in a home that my money had helped pay for, eating food purchased with money from joint accounts I contributed to, enjoying her comfortable lifestyle funded by my generosity, all while treating me like I was the freeloader. Around 5 o'clock, I heard David's car in the driveway. My heart started pounding. I'd imagined this confrontation 100 different ways over the past few hours. But now that it was actually happening, I felt almost nauseated with anxiety. I heard the front door open, and Patricia's cheerful greeting, David, you're home. How was Boston? Then I heard David's voice, flat and cold in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, we need to talk. Now. Where's Eloisa? She's in the bedroom, probably sleeping. She's been sleeping most of the time I've been here. I've been trying to tell you, David, this recovery is... Stop. David's voice cut through Patricia's words like a blade. Just stop talking and come with me. I heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. David appeared in the doorway first, still in his travel clothes, his face a storm of emotions I couldn't fully read. Behind him, Patricia looked confused and slightly irritated. David crossed to the bed, kissed my forehead, and asked quietly, Are you okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He turned to face his mother, and I saw Patricia's expression shift from confusion to concern as she registered the tension in the room. David, what's going on? Is something wrong? David pulled out his phone, opened his email, and held it up so Patricia could see the screen displaying Marcus's financial summary. Mom, I have one very simple question for you, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Over the past 3 years, where did you think the money was coming from to pay for your lifestyle at the Meridian Estates? Patricia's face went pale, and in that moment, watching her realize that her secrets were about to be exposed. I felt something close to vindication. The reckoning had begun. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her eyes darted between David's face and the phone screen, then over to me lying in the bed. I watched the calculations happening behind her eyes, trying to figure out how much David knew, how much she could still deny, what stories she could spin to make this go away. David, I don't understand what you're asking me, she finally stammered. David's jaw tightened. It's a straightforward question, Mom. You live in a facility that costs $6,500 a month. Your pension and Social Security cover maybe half of that. Where did you think the rest was coming from? Well, from you, of course. You've been helping me with the fees since they increased. You know that. I've been sending you $2,800 a month. That's what I thought I was contributing. But according to these bank records, someone has been sending you an additional $4,400 every month, plus tens of thousands in one-time payments. So I'll ask again, where did you think that money was coming from? Patricia's face flushed red. I assumed you had arranged something. Some kind of automatic payment from your accounts. I didn't question it because you told me not to worry, that you'd handle it. It was such an obvious lie. I almost felt embarrassed for her. David turned his phone around and scrolled through something. These transfers all came from an account in Eloisa's name. Every single one. The account she set up after she sold her company. An account you've been receiving payments from for 3 years. Patricia's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw genuine shock cross her face. She hadn't known about the sale of my company. She hadn't known I had money of my own. In her mind, I'd just been David's wife, someone who'd maybe had a small business but nothing significant. Eloisa. You've been... Patricia trailed off, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. Yes, I said quietly. I've been paying the difference in your living expenses, and the dental work, and the flooring, and the furniture, and the cruise, and everything else you've asked for over the past 3 years. Patricia sank down onto the chair in the corner of the room, her designer handbag sliding off her shoulder onto the floor. I didn't know. I thought, David said we were helping, so I assumed... You assumed it was David's money, I finished for her. You never once asked me directly about it. You'd call me crying about emergencies. I'd transfer the funds, and you'd thank me and promise it was the last time. Over and over again. David was staring at his mother with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and dawning realization. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about these other expenses? The furniture? The cruise? If you needed more help, why did you go to Eloisa behind my back? Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. I didn't want to burden you. You work so hard, and I knew you were already stretching yourself thin to help me. Eloisa offered, and she seemed happy to help, so I didn't think it was a problem. You didn't think it was a problem, David repeated slowly. But you specifically asked Eloisa not to tell me about the full extent of her support, didn't you? Patricia's silence was enough. David looked at me. Is that true? I nodded. She said it would upset you or make you feel like you weren't doing enough for her. I thought I was protecting your relationship with her. Protecting our relationship? David echoed, then turned back to his mother. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. My wife has been secretly supporting you to the tune of over $300,000 at your request, specifically keeping it from me to spare my feelings. And this week, while I was in Boston and Eloisa was recovering from major surgery, how did you treat her? Patricia's face went from red to white. David, I was under a lot of stress. Taking care of someone is difficult, and Answer the question, Mom. How did you treat her? The room fell silent. Patricia looked at me with something like desperation in her eyes, silently begging me not to tell him, but I was done protecting her. She told me I was acting like a burden, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning in my chest. She said I was draining your resources and playing the victim. She suggested that I was going to drive you away with my neediness. She abandoned me for 5 hours without my medication or any way to get out of bed because she wanted to go shopping. She made it very clear that she saw me as an inconvenience and an invalid who was taking advantage of your good nature. David's face had gone completely still. It was the expression he got in the operating room when something went terribly wrong. That cold, focused calm that meant he was processing something catastrophic. "Is this true?" he asked his mother. Patricia's mouth trembled. I was frustrated. Caregiving is exhausting, and she kept needing things, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. I didn't mean them the way they sounded. You called my wife a burden while she recovered from a surgery that happened because someone ran a red light and nearly killed her. A wife who has been supporting you financially for 3 years without asking for anything in return. A wife who kept your secrets and protected your pride and made sure you could live in the kind of place you wanted to live. David's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it more devastating. And your response to her generosity was to treat her like garbage the moment you had to do anything for her. David, please, you're being unfair. I was under stress. No. The single word cut through the air like a whip. You don't get to use stress as an excuse for cruelty. Eloisa was the one under stress. She's the one who's been in pain, who's been helpless, who's been vulnerable. And instead of showing her compassion, you showed her exactly what you really think of her. Patricia started crying. Not the delicate tears she'd used so effectively over the years when asking for money, but ugly, desperate sobs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the money. If you'd known what? I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. If you'd known I was rich, you would have treated me better? That's what you're saying? That your respect for me was conditional on my bank account? Patricia froze, realizing the trap she'd walked into. Because here's the thing, Patricia, I continued. You should have treated me well regardless of who was paying your bills. I'm your son's wife. I've been nothing but kind to you for 7 years. I've hosted you for holidays, remembered your birthday, listened to your stories, supported your relationship with David. And the moment I needed help, the moment I was vulnerable, you showed me who you really are. I made a mistake, Patricia whispered. People make mistakes. Mistakes are accidents, David said. What you did was calculated cruelty. You looked at my wife lying helpless in bed and decided she deserved to be put in her place. The only thing you didn't know was that she's the one who's been keeping you in your place this whole time, Patricia flinched as if she'd been slapped. David pulled out his phone again and started typing. I'm texting Jennifer to come over and stay with Eloisa for a few days. Mom, I'm going to drive you home to Naperville right now. And then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about boundaries, respect, and what happens next. What happens next? Patricia's voice was small and frightened. That depends entirely on you, David said coldly. But I can tell you this much. Eloisa will not be sending you another penny. Not now, not ever. And neither will I until you've done some serious reflection on your behavior. Patricia's face crumpled. David, you can't just cut me off. How will I afford? You'll figure it out the same way every other person figures it out, David said. You'll downsize. You'll move to a place you can actually afford with your pension and Social Security. You'll live within your means like an adult instead of taking advantage of your daughter-in-law's generosity while treating her like she's beneath you. But the Meridian Estates is my home. All my friends are there. I can't just leave. You should have thought of that before you decided to bite the hand that was feeding you, I said quietly. Patricia turned to me, her eyes pleading. Eloisa, please. I know I said terrible things, but I didn't mean them. You have to understand I was overwhelmed and tired and your true feelings came out, I finished. That's what happens when people are tired and overwhelmed. The mask slips, and you see what's really underneath. I saw what you really think of me, Patricia. And I can't unsee it. David picked up his mother's handbag from the floor and handed it to her. Let's go, Mom. We're leaving now. Patricia stood on shaky legs, looking between us like she couldn't believe this was really happening. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at me. I really am sorry, she said. And for the first time, she actually sounded genuine. I know you are, I replied. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are consequences. But I don't think you're actually sorry for how you treated me. Because if you were, you would have apologized before you knew about the money. Patricia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. There was nothing she could say that would make this better. After they left, the house fell into profound silence. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, processing everything that had just happened. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad. Part of me felt relieved that the truth was finally out. But mostly, I just felt tired. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Jennifer is on her way. I'll be back late tonight. I love you so much. Thank you for everything you did for my mother, even though she didn't deserve it. We'll talk when I get home." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. The confrontation was over, but I had a feeling the real fallout was just beginning. Jennifer arrived 30 minutes later with an overnight bag and a container of homemade chicken soup. She took one look at my face and immediately pulled me into the gentlest hug possible given my surgical restrictions. "David texted me the basics," she said, settling into the chair Patricia had vacated. "I cannot believe she treated you like that. After everything you've done for her?" I filled Jennifer in on the details, the overheard phone conversations, the abandonment, the cruel words, and finally the confrontation. Jennifer's expression shifted from shock to fury to something close to admiration. "Good for you," she said firmly. "You should have cut her off the first time she disrespected you." $300,000, Eloisa. Do you know what most people could do with that kind of money? I know, and I did. I'd been thinking about it all afternoon. That money could have gone towards so many other things: charitable foundations, scholarships for underprivileged kids interested in tech, investing in women-owned startups. Instead, it had gone to fund the lifestyle of someone who'd seen my generosity as something she was entitled to. "What did David say when he found out?" Jennifer asked. "He was devastated. I've never seen him that angry at his mother. He literally packed her up and drove her home without even unpacking his own suitcase from Boston." Jennifer shook her head. "He should be angry. She manipulated both of you. She manipulated you into giving her money and keeping secrets. And she manipulated him by playing the struggling widow card while living like she was in a luxury resort." That night, Jennifer helped me with everything Patricia had neglected, bringing me fresh water, helping me take my evening medications on time, making sure I had everything I needed within reach before she settled onto the couch for the night. The contrast between her caring attention and Patricia's resentful minimal effort was striking. David came home just before midnight. I heard him talking quietly with Jennifer in the living room, then his footsteps approaching the bedroom. He looked exhausted, not just physically tired, but emotionally drained in a way I'd rarely seen. He sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand. "I'm so sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. You didn't do anything wrong. I brought her into our home. I left you alone with her when you were vulnerable. I didn't see what she was really like because I was too busy remembering the mother who sacrificed for me when I was a kid." His voice cracked slightly. "I should have protected you better." "David, you couldn't have known. She was careful to hide it from you. That's what manipulative people do. They show different faces to different people." He was quiet for a long moment. I drove her home and we talked for 3 hours in her apartment. Actually, I talked. She mostly cried and made excuses. She kept saying she didn't mean it, that she was just stressed, that she didn't understand who was really paying for everything. "Do you believe her?" David let out a bitter laugh. "Does it matter? Even if she didn't know the money was specifically from you, she knew someone was supporting her. She knew she couldn't afford her lifestyle on her own, and her response to that generosity was to treat my wife like a burden the moment she needed help. That tells me everything I need to know about her character." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that effective immediately, all financial support from our family stops. I told her she has 60 days to figure out alternative living arrangements because the Meridian Estates will start eviction proceedings once the payments stop. I told her that she's not welcome in our home until she makes a genuine apology to you. Not the fake sorry I got caught kind, but real accountability for her actions." "How did she take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Lots of crying, some anger, some bargaining. She tried to tell me I was being cruel, that she's an elderly woman who can't be expected to just start over. I reminded her that she's 68, in good health, and perfectly capable of living within her means like millions of other retirees do. I squeezed his hand. This must be so hard for you. You know what the hardest part is? David's eyes were glistening, realizing that the mother I thought I knew might not exist anymore. Or maybe she never existed, and I just wanted to believe she was better than she is. She raised me alone, worked so hard, sacrificed so much. I thought that meant she was a good person. But good people don't treat others the way she treated you. People are complicated. She can be both the mother who sacrificed for you and the woman who was cruel to me. Those things can exist in the same person. Maybe. But I can't excuse one because of the other. And I won't. David leaned down and kissed my forehead. You've been carrying this secret for 3 years, protecting her, protecting me, taking care of everyone but yourself. That ends now. From now on, we make decisions together. No more secrets about money, no more trying to manage everything alone. Deal? Deal. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Jennifer stayed for 2 more nights before her father was released from the hospital, and she needed to get back to her own life. Rosa returned, apologetic and professional as always. David took a week off work to be home with me, helping me through the worst of my recovery while we both processed what had happened. Patricia called 17 times in the first 3 days. David answered once, repeated that he had nothing new to say, and then stopped picking up. She left voicemails that ranged from tearfully apologetic to indignantly angry. One message accused me of turning her son against her. Another begged David to reconsider because she'd be homeless on the streets. David played that last message for me. She won't be homeless. She has options. They're just not as luxurious as what she's gotten used to. There are plenty of affordable senior communities. She has friends she could potentially move in with. She could even get a part-time job. People older than her work every day. On the 5th day, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Eloisa. It's Margaret Whitmore. I'm a friend of Patricia's from the Meridian Estates. I immediately tensed. Hello, Margaret. I'm calling because Patricia is quite distraught, and she's been telling everyone here about the terrible situation with her son cutting her off financially. She says you've turned David against her after everything she did to help care for you during your recovery. The audacity took my breath away. Is that what she told you? Well, yes. She said she spent days caring for you, and then you repaid her kindness by convincing David to abandon his own mother. Several of us are quite concerned about her well-being. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger rising in my chest. Margaret, I'm going to tell you the truth, and you can decide for yourself what to believe. For 3 years, I've been sending Patricia over $7,000 monthly, plus covering tens of thousands in additional expenses. She never told David the full extent of what I was paying because she asked me to keep it secret. While she was staying at my home last week, supposedly to help me recover from major spinal surgery, she called me a burden, abandoned me without my medications for 5 hours while she went shopping, and told me I was going to drive her son away with my neediness. That's why the financial support has stopped, not because I turned David against her, but because she showed her true colors when I needed help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I had no idea, Margaret finally said, her voice much quieter. Of course you didn't. Patricia is very good at controlling the narrative. But before you and your friends rally around her, you might want to ask yourselves how a woman on a fixed pension and Social Security has been affording to live at the Meridian Estates, go on European cruises, and buy new furniture every few months. That money came from somewhere, and it wasn't from her son's salary. Dear God, Margaret whispered. I don't expect you to take sides, Margaret, but I do expect you to get the full story before you call someone's house to accuse them of elder abuse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to rest. Recovering from surgery is quite exhausting. I hung up before she could respond. David had been listening from the doorway. That was incredibly satisfying to overhear. She's going to twist that conversation somehow. Tell everyone I was cruel or attacking her or something. Let her. The truth is out now. Anyone who actually matters will figure out what really happened. David came and sat beside me. I got an email from the administrator at the Meridian Estates today. They've noticed the payment issues and wanted to discuss Patricia's account. I called them back and explained that we would no longer be contributing to her fees and that any financial arrangements would need to be made directly with her. How did they respond? Professionally. They thanked me for the notice and said they'd work with her to find a solution. Reading between the lines, I think that means they'll give her 30 days to either pay up or move out. Do you feel guilty about that? David considered the question carefully. No, I feel sad. I feel disappointed. I feel grief for the relationship I thought we had. But I don't feel guilty. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. That's how adulthood works. 3 weeks later, Patricia sent a formal letter to our house. Not an email or a text, but an actual typed letter on fancy stationery. David opened it at the kitchen table while I watched over his shoulder. The letter was 3 pages long. The first page was a carefully crafted apology that hit all the right notes, acknowledging her behavior, expressing remorse, explaining that stress wasn't an excuse. The second page was a detailed explanation of her financial situation and her plan to move to a more affordable senior apartment complex in Aurora. The third page was a request to slowly rebuild the relationship, starting with phone calls and eventually, if we were willing, supervised visits. David read it twice, then handed it to me. What do you think? I studied the words carefully. They sounded genuine, but I'd learned that Patricia was skilled at saying what people wanted to hear. I think it's a start. But words are easy. I want to see sustained changed behavior over time before I'm willing to trust her again. That's fair. David folded the letter and set it aside. I'll call her next week. Not because I'm ready to forgive everything, but because she's still my mother, and completely cutting her off forever isn't what I want either. But it's going to be on our terms now, with clear boundaries. I can live with that. And I could. The anger had faded into something more like resigned acceptance. Patricia had shown me who she really was, and I'd shown her that kindness wasn't weakness. The power dynamic had shifted permanently, and we both knew it. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the people who hurt us. Patricia had taught me that generosity without boundaries is just enabling, that keeping secrets to protect others often protects no one, that the people who deserve your help the least are often the ones who demand it the most. But she'd also taught me something else, that I was strong enough to stand up for myself, even when it meant blowing up the careful peace I'd been maintaining. That was worth more than $330,000 any day. 2 months passed before David made that promised phone call to his mother. By then, I was walking without assistance, attending physical therapy 3 times a week, and slowly reclaiming my independence. The physical healing mirrored the emotional distance I'd needed to process everything that had happened. David had the call on the speaker in our living room, with my permission. I sat beside him on the couch, close enough to hear, but far enough to feel like I had space if I needed it. Hi. Mom? David said when Patricia answered. David? Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, less assured. Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would, and I meant it. How are you settling into the new place? There was a pause, and I could hear Patricia choosing her words carefully. It's an adjustment. The apartment is much smaller than my suite at the Meridian. But it's clean, and the other residents are friendly enough. I've been volunteering at the library twice a week, which helps pass the time. David's eyebrows rose slightly. Patricia volunteering was new. In all the years I'd known her, she'd never mentioned volunteer work. That's good. Mom, I'm glad you're staying active. I've also started seeing a therapist, Patricia continued, and this genuinely surprised both of us. Her name is Dr. Walsh. She specializes in family dynamics and helping older adults navigate life transitions. We've been talking about a lot of things, including my behavior toward Eloisa. David glanced at me, and I gave a small nod, encouraging him to continue. What have those conversations been like? He asked. Patricia let out a shaky breath. Difficult, humbling. Dr. Walsh has helped me understand that I was operating from a place of deep insecurity. When you married Eloisa, I felt like I was being replaced. You'd always been my purpose, raising you, supporting you, being your mother. And then suddenly you had this brilliant, successful wife, and I felt obsolete. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but understanding. I hadn't considered that Patricia might have felt threatened by me. That doesn't excuse how I treated her, Patricia continued quickly. Dr. Walsh has been very clear about that, but it helps explain it. When Eloisa needed care, and I saw how dependent she was, I think some twisted part of me felt superior for the first time in years. Like I finally had something she needed that she couldn't provide for herself. And I used that power to hurt her, because hurt people hurt people. David's hand found mine and squeezed. Mom, I appreciate you being honest about this. But Eloisa is the one who deserves to hear this, not me. I know. I'm working up to that. If she's willing to listen, Patricia's voice cracked slightly. Is she there? Can she hear me? I looked at David and he raised his eyebrows in question. I took a deep breath and spoke. I'm here, Patricia. Another pause. When Patricia spoke again, I could hear tears in her voice. Eloisa, I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I understand what I did. I took your generosity, 3 years of unbelievable generosity, and I threw it back in your face the moment you needed something from me. I called you a burden when you were the one carrying me. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. They felt different from the careful apology in her letter. This felt raw, unscripted, real. I also need to tell you something else, Patricia continued. After you cut off the support, I had to go through all my financial records to figure out what I could afford. And I realized something that made me physically ill. Do you remember that European cruise I took 2 years ago? Yes, I said quietly. That trip cost $7,500. I was gone for 2 weeks. While I was sailing down the Danube, posting pictures on Facebook, drinking wine with my book club friends, you were working 80-hour weeks trying to close a major contract for your company. David had mentioned it to me before I left, saying you were under tremendous stress. And I didn't even think to postpone my trip or offer to help or do anything except take your money and have a wonderful time. Her voice broke completely. There were a dozen moments like that. Times when you were struggling or stressed or needed support, and I was too busy enjoying the lifestyle you were funding to even notice. I was so focused on maintaining my image, on proving to my friends that I was living well, that I never stopped to think about who was actually paying for it all. And when I found out it was you, my first thought wasn't gratitude. It was resentment. Because you had something I didn't, real success, real security, and I couldn't stand it. I found myself blinking back tears. This level of self-awareness, this brutal honesty, was something I never expected from Patricia. Dr. Walsh asked me to make a list of every time I took from you without giving back, Patricia continued. It's 17 pages long? 17 pages of times I accepted your money, your time, your emotional labor, and gave you nothing but demands and criticism in return. Looking at that list written out in black and white, I couldn't lie to myself anymore about who I'd become. David's grip on my hand tightened. He looked as stunned as I felt. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me, Patricia said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that I finally saw it. I see what I did. I see who I was, and I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who doesn't measure her worth by her zip code or her furniture or what her friends think. Someone who treats kindness as the gift it is instead of the entitlement I treated it as. The line went quiet for a moment, except for Patricia's soft crying. Finally, I spoke. Patricia, I appreciate you saying all of this. I really do. But I need you to understand something. I can't go back to how things were. Even if we rebuild some kind of relationship, it will never be the same. I can't be the person who solves your problems or funds your lifestyle or keeps secrets to protect your pride. Those boundaries are permanent. I understand, Patricia said immediately. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for anything except the possibility that someday, maybe, You might be able to be in the same room with me without feeling the hurt I caused you. Even if that takes years, even if it never fully happens. I just want the chance to show you, through my actions over time, that I'm genuinely trying to be better. David cleared his throat. Mom, I think that's a reasonable starting point. But Eloisa gets to set the pace. If she needs more time, we take more time. If she's never comfortable with in-person visits, we respect that. This is about her healing, not about you feeling better about what you did. I understand, Patricia repeated. Eloisa, would you be willing to exchange emails occasionally? Nothing heavy, just small updates about our lives? It would mean a lot to me, but I'll respect whatever you decide. I thought about it. Email felt safe. I could read her messages on my own timeline, respond when I was ready, maintain distance while still leaving a door open. I can do emails, I said finally. But Patricia, if I see any sign of manipulation, any guilt-tripping, any attempts to ask for money indirectly, I'm done. Permanently. Do you understand? Yes, completely. Thank you, Eloisa. Thank you for even giving me this much. After the call ended, David and I sat in silence for several minutes. What are you thinking? He asked finally. I'm thinking that people can surprise you. I never thought I'd hear Patricia take genuine accountability like that. It doesn't erase what she did, but it's more than I expected. Do you think she's really changed, or is this just another performance? I considered the question. I think she's trying to change. Whether she succeeds long-term, whether this becomes who she really is or just a temporary phase because she faced consequences, that remains to be seen. But I'm willing to give her the chance to prove it. From a safe distance. David pulled me closer, kissing the top of my head. You're more generous than I would be in your position. I'm not being generous. I'm being strategic. If I completely cut her off, she becomes the victim in the story she tells herself and everyone else. This way, she has no excuse. If she fails to do the work or falls back into old patterns, it's on her. But if she genuinely changes, then maybe something good comes from all of this pain. When did you get so wise about human nature? I laughed softly. Around the time I spent $330,000 learning an expensive lesson about boundaries. Over the next few months, Patricia did send occasional emails. They were brief, factual updates about her life, her volunteer work at the library, a cooking class she'd joined, books she was reading. She asked polite questions about my recovery and David's work. She never once mentioned money or her living situation or complained about what she'd lost. It was such a stark contrast to the woman who'd stood in my bedroom and called me a burden that sometimes I wondered if I was corresponding with a different person entirely. But the real test came 6 months after that first phone call. I was at physical therapy when my phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "No response needed. Just wanted you to know." I opened it. Curious. Dear Eloisa, I wanted to share something with you, not because I expect praise or recognition, but because I think you deserve to know. Last week, one of my new neighbors, Helen, mentioned she was struggling to afford her medications. Without thinking, I almost offered to help her financially. Then I remembered I don't have extra money anymore. But more importantly, I remembered what Dr. Walsh and I have been working on about boundaries and enabling. Instead of offering money, I helped Helen research prescription assistance programs and drove her to the health department to apply. She got approved for a program that will cover 80% of her medication costs. She cried and thanked me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd actually helped someone instead of just throwing money at a problem. I used to think that financial generosity was the only kind that mattered. You taught me that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is your time and genuine care. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that lesson. Thank you for showing me, through your own actions over the years, what real kindness looks like. With gratitude, Patricia. I read the email 3 times, then forwarded it to David. His response came back within minutes. This is the mother I thought I had. Maybe she's still in there after all. Maybe she was. Or maybe she was becoming someone new, someone forged by consequences and self-reflection and the hard work of changing ingrained patterns. Either way, I realized something important. Patricia's transformation wasn't about me forgiving her or forgetting what happened. It was about her doing the work to become someone who wouldn't make those same mistakes again, and that work had to be hers alone. I couldn't do it for her, couldn't fund it, couldn't manage it. All I could do was watch from a distance and decide, over time, whether her actions matched her words. For now, that was enough. A year after the confrontation, I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, adjusting the collar of my blouse. My back had healed completely. No more pain, no more limitations. Dr. Fletcher had cleared me for all normal activities, and I'd even started training for a 5K race. The physical scars were still there, a thin line down my spine that I'd probably carry for the rest of my life, but they didn't bother me anymore. Scars were just proof that you'd survived something difficult. Today was significant for a different reason. David and I were meeting Patricia for lunch, our first in-person meeting since that devastating afternoon when she'd been escorted out of our home. It had been my idea, which had surprised both David and me when I'd suggested it 3 weeks earlier. "Are you sure?" David had asked, studying my face carefully for any sign of doubt or obligation. "I'm sure. She's been consistent for a year. The emails, the therapy updates, the changed behavior. I think I'm ready to see if the person she's become in writing is the same person she is face-to-face." We'd chosen a neutral location, a casual bistro in downtown Chicago, halfway between our home and Patricia's apartment in Aurora. Nothing fancy, nothing loaded with memories. Just a simple lunch where we could talk like adults without the weight of history crushing us. David drove, his hand finding mine at every red light. "You can change your mind at any point. We can leave whenever you want to leave. This is on your terms, I know. Thank you." Patricia was already there when we arrived, seated at a corner table away from the main crowd. She stood when she saw us, and I was struck by how different she looked. Her hair was simpler, styled but not salon-perfect. She wore a nice cardigan and slacks instead of her usual designer ensemble. No expensive jewelry, no statement handbag. She looked normal, approachable, real. "Hi," she said softly, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "Thank you both for coming." David kissed her cheek, and I managed a small smile and nod. We all sat, and for a moment nobody spoke. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. "I'm nervous. I've rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times, and now my mind is completely blank." "You don't have to perform for us, Mom," David said gently. "Just be yourself." "That's what I'm trying to figure out, who that is." Patricia smiled ruefully. "Dr. Walsh says that's actually progress. Questioning who you are means you're open to change." The server came by for our drink orders, giving us a momentary reprieve from the tension. After she left, Patricia looked directly at me for the first time. "Eloisa, I know I've apologized in writing, but I need to say it to your face. I'm sorry for the cruelty, for the ingratitude, for treating you like you were less than when you were the one holding everything together. I'm sorry for taking advantage of your generosity and for betraying your trust. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for it." I studied her face, looking for any sign of performance or manipulation. All I saw was genuine remorse. "I appreciate that, Patricia. Thank you. I also want you to know that I've been working with a financial counselor," she continued. "I've created a budget that I can actually sustain on my pension and Social Security. I'm living within my means for the first time in years, maybe the first time ever. And it's been surprisingly freeing. I don't have to keep up appearances anymore. I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not." David leaned forward. "How's the apartment working out?" "Honestly, I like it better than the Meridian. My neighbors are real people dealing with real problems, not trying to one-up each other with vacation stories and designer purchases. Last week, 4 of us got together to play cards, and you know what we talked about? Library books, gardening, our grandkids. Well, they talked about their grandkids. I mostly listened." She glanced at David with a hopeful expression. "Maybe someday I'll have grandchildren to talk about, too." David and I exchanged a quick look. We'd been talking about starting a family, but that conversation was private. and neither of us was ready to share it with Patricia yet. "Someday," David said diplomatically. The server returned with our drinks, and we ordered lunch. As we waited for our food, the conversation gradually became easier, more natural. Patricia asked about my work. I'd started consulting for healthcare tech startups, using my expertise without the pressure of running my own company. She asked about David's research, listening attentively as he explained his latest project. And surprisingly, she talked about her own life without complaints or requests. The book club she'd joined at the Aurora Public Library, the financial literacy class she was taking at the community center. Her volunteer work helps other seniors navigate technology. Last week, I taught an 82-year-old woman how to video chat with her daughter in Seattle, Patricia said, and there was genuine pride in her voice. She cried when she saw her granddaughter's face on the screen for the first time. It made me realize that I'd spent so much time focused on things, furniture, cruises, appearances, that I'd forgotten what actually matters. Our food arrived, and we ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Patricia set down her fork and looked at me again. "I need to tell you something else. Last month, Margaret Whitmore, you remember her? She called you after everything happened. She reached out to me. She said, 'The Meridian Estates is having a reunion event for former residents, and several of my old friends wanted to know if I'd come. Are you going?' I asked. I told her no. She was surprised and said everyone would love to see me. But the truth is, I don't want to go back to that world. Those friendships were all built on superficial things, comparing lifestyles, gossiping about who had what. Now that I'm not living that way anymore, I realize how exhausting it all was. Always trying to keep up, always worried about what people thought." She paused. "The friends I have now don't care about any of that. They like me for who I am, not for where I live or what I can afford." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Patricia had genuinely changed. This wasn't a performance or a manipulation. She'd done the hard work of examining herself and choosing to be different. "I'm proud of you, Mom," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know this hasn't been easy." "It's been the hardest thing I've ever done," Patricia admitted. "Harder than raising you alone? Harder than working 2 jobs? Because this time, I couldn't blame my circumstances or other people. I had to look at my own choices and my own character and admit that I'd become someone I didn't like very much." She turned to me. "Eloisa, I know you can't forget what I did. I don't expect you to, but I hope that over time you can see that I'm genuinely trying to be better. Not for you, not for David, but for myself." "I can see that," I said quietly. "And Patricia? I want you to know that I don't regret helping you those 3 years. I regret that you didn't appreciate it at the time, and I regret that I didn't set boundaries sooner. But I don't regret the generosity itself. That was a choice I made freely, and it came from a good place." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "That's more grace than I deserve." "Maybe, but it's what I'm choosing to give anyway." We finished lunch, and as we stood to leave, Patricia hesitated. "Would it be all right if I hugged you, Eloisa? If not, I completely understand." I looked at this woman who'd caused me so much pain, who'd called me a burden, who'd taken my generosity and thrown it back in my face. And I saw someone different now, someone humbled, someone trying, someone genuine. I stepped forward and hugged her. It was brief, a little awkward, but it was real. "Thank you," Patricia whispered, "for this chance." In the car on the way home, David was quiet until we hit the highway. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking that people are capable of change when they're willing to do the work. I'm thinking that consequences sometimes lead to growth. And I'm thinking that I'm glad I didn't let bitterness win." "Do you trust her now?" I considered the question. I trust that she's changed. I don't know if I trust her completely yet. That will take more time. But I'm open to the possibility. That's more than I thought I'd ever feel again. "You're an incredible person, you know that?" I smiled. "I'm just someone who learned an expensive lesson about boundaries, self-worth, and the difference between generosity and enabling." Patricia and I both had to learn those lessons. The difference is, I learned them while I still had my dignity and my money. She had to lose both to figure it out. Do you think we'll ever get back to a normal family relationship? I don't know if we'll ever be normal, but maybe we can build something new. Something based on honesty and respect instead of secrets and obligation. That might actually be better than normal. 6 months after that lunch, Patricia sent me a card for my birthday. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for showing me that the best gift you can give someone is seeing their worth. You saw mine even when I couldn't see it myself, and you saw your own worth when I tried to diminish it. Both of those things saved my life in different ways. Happy birthday, Eloisa. With love and gratitude, Patricia." I kept that card in my desk drawer, where I still keep it today. Not because I need validation, but because it reminds me of something important. People can surprise you. Growth is possible at any age. And sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most meaningful transformations. The woman who called me a burden is gone. In her place is someone I can actually respect, maybe even like someday. That's not the ending I expected when I lay in that bed a year ago, tears streaming down my face. Feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. But it's an ending I'll take. Because here's what I learned from all of this. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself when others fail to see your value. I could have let Patricia's cruelty define me, could have internalized her message that I was a burden, could have shrunk myself to manage her insecurity. Instead, I stood up for myself. I set boundaries. I demanded respect. And in doing so, I forced everyone around me, including Patricia, to see me clearly. That's not about revenge or vindication. It's about dignity. And dignity, I've learned, is worth more than $330,000 any day. My name is Eloisa Robinson, and this was my story. Thank you for listening. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.